Hi everybody and welcome to Matrix Live Season 2, Episode 13, which I guess makes it almost mid-season update on where we're at with Matrix. I'm afraid it's just me this week. I'm on holiday up in Scotland, as you can see, because it's the frozen north out there. And Amandine's on holiday too, so I was just going to give a quick update on what happened last week before I forget it. Start off on the Riot side of things. riot-web 0.14 was all ready to go out the door with a final release candidate at the end of last week until we got some pretty robust feedback from particularly the Elliptic supporters group, pointing out that we'd screwed up on communities management in that there isn't a way for people to voluntarily join their own groups or communities. This is a completely accidental omission that we just hadn't thought about, honestly. So apologies that that got dropped, and we spent last week, although it was a short week due to Easter, getting that implemented and should be ready to go with an actual 0.14 happening shortly after Easter. Meanwhile, we've been starting work on 0.15 and, more excitingly, actually putting together a proper roadmap for the first time ever in terms of what remains before we get to a 1.0 release of Riot. And obviously that ties in with a 1.0 for Matrix 2, although in this instance we're focusing very much on the Riot stuff. We haven't published it yet. We will shortly. The only thing that remains is trying to put some vague timelines on it, but we now know, I think, the scope of what will go into it. The good news is that the first part of that is 0.15, and the idea is to do sprints of a couple of weeks for each new major release. 15 will have sticker packs at long last, and in fact I just saw that Rick merged them onto develop. They don't seem to have shown up in the UI yet, probably because the back-end scalar stuff has to get done too. But suffice it to say that the code is finally in develop there for 15. Looking really cool. Got animated sticker packs and sticker pack investigators, and I saw that Travis has been working on sticker pack hosting for Dimension as well, so you will not be limited to whatever stuff we put out on the Scalar integrated integrations manager on Riot. Also on Riot 15, we're going to have jitsi by default at last, rather than the godforsaken mix of FreeSwitch and jitsi that we have today. And the other thing that we have to get in there is more telemetry for performance gathering, because whilst we've done a lot of performance work recently, it's been sorry, still dying slightly from flu. It's been a little bit random in terms of what we target, and a lot of it is based on my account and me saying, oh, if I'm in 2,000 rooms and these things are really slow and I keep running out of memory. But the fact is that we don't have that good visibility on what actual real life users of Riot are seeing in the wild, and so what we're going to do is to put in performance stuff. I think some of it has already landed, to better monitor how long it takes to change room, how long it takes to launch, how sluggish typing is, all that sort of thing, and then phone that back home so that we have some level of visibility there, if of course you opt in to the Pyrrhic analytics. Stretch goals are fixing the layering at last between riot-web and Matrix react-sdk, which will make it a billion times easier for people to develop on at last. Also really want to get the lazy loading of room members out, which reduces RAM usage by a factor of 3 to 5. And finally, cross-signing for end-to-end so that you will not get verification pop-ups all the time. Quite how much of that we get to do depends on how many disasters and unexpected misadventures we get along the way, but that's the sort of thing that's on the menu. Then, Riot Mobile this week was mainly, first of all, emergency releases to fix a denial of service factor onto Synapse. I'll talk about more in the Synapse section to do with redactions. This got released on both Android and iOS. Oh, actually, did it on iOS? No, the iOS one is blocked by our build server and accidentally getting turned off over the Easter break. Oops, sorry. The Android one did get rushed out on Good Friday, but unfortunately there was a screw-up in the version that got uploaded, which meant that it broke push for everybody, and so there was then on Saturday an emergency release of 0.85 on Android. If you're not on 0.85 on Android, please upgrade now, but otherwise nothing will work. What else? Sticker packs got implemented on both platforms, and yet more wrangling of Android push notifications, basically. Then on the Synapse side of things, Synapse 27 finally got released at the beginning of last week. It's currently on 0.27.2. If you haven't upgraded, please do so. Then it's been a really exciting week. Again, I keep saying this, but it's even true every time. 27 has got a lot of the work in it for scalable workers that we've been talking about. And I think it's even got all of it in it. But what we've been looking at since then is general, or a whole new class of performance work. And the thing driving this is, of course, keeping matrix.org itself running, especially the Freenode bridge. And there are two big breakthroughs, one of which is Eric's realization that it's possible to incrementally calculate state resolution results. So historically, you have to do them entirely from scratch every time. It takes up loads of RAM, takes lots of CPU, and it's very dumb. This is switching for a much, much smarter implementation. And he implemented it as a test jig and also put some metrics in to see what the performance would be like in running through it in a real-life scenario last week. And apparently, over 90% of state resolutions would be able to be sped up using this trick. And the sort of speed ups we were seeing on aggregate were a factor of 9. So this could be massive in terms of speeding up matrix, especially on low power devices and using less resources. Obviously, many other things in Synapse slow as molasses, and so it could end up getting kind of eclipsed by some of them, but hopefully overall it's good. Also, VDH has been doing a lot of JSON profiling work after some dramas we had with the JSON libraries. Apparently our canonical JSON serialization is now 3 times faster, which will speed up obviously that bit of the Federation world significantly. And there's also been a lot of others sort of working out the differences between the different versions of JSON libraries and their performance, which turns out that it varies massively between minor versions and all that sort of thing. Probably most excitingly has been a whole bunch of new contributions from Not-a-File, who has been hacking away, converting Synapse from Python 2 to Python 3 all week. And thank you so much for doing this, Not-a-File, because it's obviously something we would love to do, but haven't remotely had bandwidth to even think of looking at. But having it coming in as a contribution is looking incredibly promising. Apparently all the unit tests pass already, as of a few days ago. And so he's moved on to using the SciTest integration test suite to go and get those to pass. I'm not sure where it's at. I think there was some URL problems getting the right mixture of strings and bytes or whatever you have to do in Python 3. But either way, really, really, really exciting. And the most exciting thing here is that it would shrink the memory usage by probably a factor of 3 or 4. Because Python 3 stores strings in UTF-8 and Python 2 stores strings in UTF-32, and 32 is 4 times bigger than 8, roughly speaking. So should see some major improvements there. Also, I think garbage collection in general and memory management has improved a lot in Python 3, so who knows what the next gen of Synapse could look like. It's all a bit random. We weren't exactly planning to double down on Synapse at this point, but given that we found some lowish hanging fruit that could really revolutionize things, plus the Python 3 work going on from Not-a-File, let's make the most of it and see what happens. Other stuff is GDPR compliance on the horizon. We get to add an API that allows people to commit suicide, as it were, within their server, deleting their account. What we're not doing on the initial phase is a mega redact that tries to obliterate everything they ever said through all of Matrix. We'll probably add it later on, but in the first incarnation, it just says, hey, please destroy any evidence of me from ever having been on this server. And also we'll have hooks to stop that account then getting synchronized back in from other servers, or messages for that account getting synchronized in from other ones. Hopefully this should be good enough. Other stuff in Synapse is official Ansible playbooks are in development, and we're also finally going to be merging or working out what to do with the Docker official Docker file PR that KU very kindly produced about a month and a bit ago now, and we've been sitting on. But as we now have Michael, who joined us as an ops guy a couple of weeks ago, he's working through both Ansible and Docker stuff. And finally, we had lots of operational hell due to the DOSes caused by redactions from mobile clients that I mentioned earlier. This resulted in us doubling our number of synchrotrons, the sync workers on Synapse on matrix.org, and splitting them into incremental sync and initial sync classes, which has hopefully helped things for everybody, but also means that if something goes horribly wrong and you kick off a whole bunch of clients, in our instance about 20,000 Android clients, all of which suddenly decided to do an initial sync, it means that we actually have capacity to support those 20,000 clients all trying to sync huge amounts of data at the same time. Lazy loading membership will also help a lot with that. Dendrite, meanwhile, just for a change, has been starved up by Synapse attention. Although we are speaking at the London Go meetup on Wednesday, April the 5th. Eric is very kindly flying the flag, so I'm still going to be up here on holiday. I'm talking about Dendrite. And then on the bridges side of things, we had nightmares on Freenode on Thursday and Friday. It turned out this was a trifecta of fail in different directions. First of all, the standard CPU overload on matrix.org, meaning that joins were delayed from matrix to IRC. We've hopefully mitigated that by increasing the number of simultaneous joins we allow, because whilst we had fixed the performance issues to some extent, we hadn't actually removed the cap on the number of simultaneous ones that could execute simultaneously. So hopefully that will improve things. Second thing that went wrong is a whole new class of failure, where it turns out that the application service worker was getting starved synchronizing data through to Freenode because of spending a lot of time calculating room member lists. We're kind of on the cusp of that one. We've got an idea of how we could fix it. Need to sync next week on how we prioritize actually improving it. And finally, we had 2 net splits in quick succession that killed the poor bridge itself. And we think, why that happened, and when we restarted it the second time, we have a workaround which hopefully will avoid the risk of it getting killed by the next net split. The end result, though, is that it took us ages to recover from the outage, like 24 hours, and so I can only really apologise for the flakiness on Freenode on Thursday and Friday whilst we were sorting this out, and to only reiterate that obviously we're basically spending all of our time doing perf work to try to get the headroom required to be able to run massive services like the Freenode bridge, which says they're doing like 20 messages a second with 20,000 active users 24/7 without any problems. Finally, spec stuff. First of all, very excited this week to welcome Ben Parsons, who is joining us as a developer advocate starting tomorrow on Tuesday. And his role is basically going to be to improve the accessibility of Matrix to the general developer community, both the Matrix community of today and obviously the wider dev community of tomorrow. That will also involve working on tutorials and blogs and the spec, also governance stuff. He's coming at it from cold, so he's going to have to come up to speed first of all, but watch this space to see where things go. And it's particularly relevant with some of the governance stuff that has been going around recently, especially the discussion I mentioned earlier about the scope of groups and feedback of people saying, why did you go and design groups by yourselves? Why didn't you involve the community more? Why didn't you get more input? And can you remind me where the Google Drive folder is with all of the spec proposals and all that sort of thing? And Ben is going to help, or is definitely going to be looking at that stuff to try to make sure that we don't charge off in completely the wrong direction at any point. Finally, I've been doing some work on MLS. I mentioned it last week, and have just finished writing a big email to go off to the MLS, this is the Messaging Layer Security IETF group mailing list, talking about next generation end-to-end encryption. Basically been trying to work out how you could make this work nicely in a decentralized manner, because the fact is that it doesn't really work very nicely in the current incarnation in a decentralized manner at all. It assumes that you have some centralized server that coordinates all of the changes that are happening, which is a pain in the ass. And so I've written them a big mail called MLS and Decentralization, reminding these folk that many projects like Matrix and Tox and Secure Scuttlebutt and Whisper and PSS and all these other decentralized communication systems exist, and it would be great if this next-gen end-to-end encryption actually worked on them. And there's some proposals of how that could work, which basically involves adding another primitive into the ones that MLS gives you. It basically gives you the ability to add members to groups, remove members from groups, change the key of the group, and there's another one which I'm forgetting. But basically, it would be adding another primitive called merging or rebalancing groups such that you can have 2 different copies of the group running on different servers, and if they get desynced, that's okay, as long as there is some mechanism where you can go and resynchronize them together afterwards. And I haven't hit send on it yet because we're getting it reviewed internally before I make a tit of myself in front of the MLS guys. But hopefully it will trigger some interesting conversation about whether MLS is going to be a good long-term successor to Olm and Megolm, although we're talking at least 2 years away or so. The good thing it provides is much better performance, and in some ways a much simpler approach than the double-level Olm and Megolm thing that we have today, if it works. Finally, we've also started publishing the notes of our internal sync meetings. If you are a polynomial or elliptic supporter on Patreon or equivalent, they will be going up on Patreon or similar, or into the respective rooms as little Google documents which detail what goes on in our syncs if you cannot be bothered to listen to us sitting around a table saying, this week I shall mostly be eating potatoes, or whatever it is that people are going to be doing. I think that's it. Sorry for random stream of consciousness, Matrix Live, and hope anybody who was celebrating Easter had a great Easter, and speak to you with Andy next week. Bye.